Johnn Hook's Newsmaker Saturday starts now.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker Saturday. This is a gentleman who I have covered since he was on the Tucson School Board back in the 1980s, because I worked down there at KVOA. Congressman Raúl Grijalva, District 3, Arizona, in his 8th term, first elected to Congress in 2002. Good to see you.
Good to see you,
How
my
you
friend.
been? I'm looking at your district right now. This thing is massive.
It's pretty big.
District 3 is the second largest congressional district in the state. 1 is the biggest. But it's larger than Rhode Island, Delaware, Hawaii, Connecticut, New Jersey combined. And that southern boundary, keep an eye on that. That's 300 miles of the U.S.-Mexico border. Only Texas District 23 has a larger stretch. Great to see you.
Good to see you.
This border issue, I don't even know where to begin here. We're going to show you the caravan, the mother of all caravans, as we call this video. When you see what's happening from Central America, and you've got a very unique perspective on this that we're going to get into in a minute, because your father worked the fields coming in from the Bracero program in the 40s to work the fields, and you were born here in America. So you have, I'm sure, an empathy, a sympathy for these folks. But does any of this make sense, this kind of ad hoc, we're making it up as we go?
I think, you know, everything that we're doing, including the reaction to these caravans and to the migrants, to the asylum seeker, is everything's almost at the spur of the moment. And everybody is planning by the seat of your pants. And I think we see what happened at the border with the separation of kids and what that became. We see it now with the overload of asylum seekers and no way to process them, not enough immigration judges, not enough custom officials, not enough of that process. And then you see it again with Homeland Security and ICE releasing the migrants into different communities, be it Phoenix, Tucson.
When you see those releases, does it bother you?
No, it bothers me tremendously in the sense that, and I'm not one that it should be in detention, but this is a process in which, you know, we should have worked with community-based organizations. We should have worked with NGOs. We should have worked with
to prepare for this. This is a Greyhound bus station up in Phoenix where they've been dropping people off. When they go to the Greyhound bus station, are they moving on at that point?
Usually, when they're sent, they are. They either have a location here in the United States, or they're heading back to try to the border to cross back over and go home. But essentially, many of them in the process reconnect with some family member here as they await the date for them to come in and prove credible fear. There's an assumption that whole caravan, that everybody in there is going to come. When you seek asylum, you have to present credible fear. That doesn't mean it's universal. Some
I understand
do,
it's
and
only
some
about
don't.
10% that
Exactly.
actually make it through. But this month alone, this is boy, the numbers are staggering. In March, 103,000 apprehensions, the most in a single month since 2007. Now in 2007, it was Mexican nationals coming across. What has changed in Mexico where we're not seeing that influx, but we're now seeing it from Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala?
The difference is that migrants and unauthorized migrants that were coming into this country were coming essentially to look for work from Mexico.
Single males too.
And
right?
primarily 85% single males. Now what you have coming from Central America is those people coming either leaving a political instability and no civil society, fear of violence, and
economic opportunity.
Economic opportunity, and the loss of their agrarian lifestyle, and a lot of that is they're being called climate refugees because they have what they used to do in terms of their agrarian lifestyle is gone. We've deforested many of those areas. Things have happened, and so there's no way to make money. Growing tobacco is no longer a product in Ecuador and Honduras, so people begin to flee because there's nothing there for them. And it's a phenomena that we could have anticipated. This is why you don't cut aid to those countries for economic development. This is why you set up refugee processing centers in their home countries and invest in Mexico so they can do the pre-clearance at their own base.
So the difference we've seen now is that you've got family units coming, which we are completely not prepared to handle. Is that correct?
Right. And when we visited the locations in Tucson, I would say that 60% were primarily children, their moms, women, and maybe 10-15% male.
How do we know if these children are even connected
That's
to...
the process that has to happen in terms of verifying that you are the father, you are the mother of this particular child. And that's the process.
And the
that goes.
children do, there's no doubt, there's no disputing that the children kind of give these folks a get out of jail free card, right?
Well,
they give them a pass, they give them entry.
They give them not only entry, but they give them the opportunity to go before a judge and prove that their plea for asylum is true.
Does it bother you that our asylum laws, pretty generous, are being used against us?
No, it doesn't bother me. I think that law was put in place. It's patterned after an international law. And I think what we're seeing with migrants, it's not only here in the United States, but it's worldwide. You know, when a third of the people in the world are not living in the country of their national origin, where they were born, then one indicates that movement of people is occurring. Many factors to economic, environmental, political factors that make this movement occur.
You have empathy. Let me show tape number 2. This is some of the migrant farm workers. And again, your father in 1945 came here from Mexico, entered the United States through the Bracero program. This was an agreement where workers would come and go. Did it work better when we allowed people to kind of come and go? They wouldn't end up trapped in the United States, stuck in the interior because they'd be afraid to go home and then cross again. Was it actually better to have some kind of free movement?
I think the free movement was key. The other part of the key was that employers could sponsor their workers and get them permanent legal status. That's what happened to my dad, that the ranch that he worked on, they valued him as a worker. And the owners of the ranch and the people that ran the ranch helped sponsor him to get his status.
Where was that ranch, just out of curiosity?
In between Nogales and Tucson.
How did that shape your view of this issue?
I think it personalizes it for me a great deal. I'm doing things that were unimaginable to my parents. They worked hard to give me the opportunity, but unimaginable.
First generation.
First generation, and the personal side of it is that, you know, as a nation of immigrants, why close the door? And why not have, there's solutions to what we're seeing at the border, but nobody's working toward those solutions. In fact, this administration continues to add to the crisis, because the bigger this crisis gets in the border, it coincides with the re-election campaign for the president.
Is there a chance that there could be some kind of agreement on immigration reform to get this thing fixed? You keep hearing people say this could be fixed. Even your colleague, Tom O'Halloran, said you guys could fix it in a few days if you really wanted to.
That was offered and it was rejected. And I hope that we're going to offer it again. And that is to say, at the present crisis, and it was offered as part of a package that included parts of the wall, and it also included these measures that need to be taken to deal with the refugee asylum seekers that were coming to the border.
Should there be a wall? Do you believe that borders work and are still a big piece of our security?
$8 billion could be used so much better in so many other places. For example, the Autumn Nation has 100 miles of that 300-mile border, and they have said repeatedly there will be no wall on our sovereign land. Now, in order for the federal government to do that, they would have to suspend sovereignty, they would have to break the Constitution, and in doing so, set up a constitutional
So
crisis.
on Native American lands, you can't build it anyway.
You cannot do it.
I want to move on to, I think, really the biggest issue for Arizona, which is water.
Yep.
You got involved in brokering this deal with your colleagues in the House, and you worked closely with Martha McSally, who was a Republican, of course, dealing with the Senate to try to wrestle up votes for this water agreement, the drought contingency plan. It is a conservation agreement between Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, Nevada, California, and Wyoming in how we use the precious water from the Colorado River. Did we get the best deal we could get out of that?
We got an interim step to 2026, very valuable.
2026. I mean, that's
very
coming
valuable.
fast.
And then there has to be a more long-term agreement, 7 basin state, and the stakeholders, the water users here in Arizona as well. there's going to be some tough choices down the road. What we did, I think, was prevent a crisis of magnitude in the state.
Lake Mead's close to hitting that tipping point, right? Even with a good winter we're having, we'll see.
Well, the contributions of Gila tribe and other tribes that were instrumental in putting their share of their water into this deal was key for Arizona, because this allows Lake Mead to try to get it back up to reservoir capacity. But that has not solved the problem. There's some tough choices that we're going to have to face in the state of Arizona, an arid state, around the issue of water, a finite resource that is not replenishable.
Of all the states I mentioned, where do we land out of all those states that are involved in that deal, in that water deal, in terms of in the pecking order? Where the heck are we between New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, Nevada, California, Wyoming, and us? Are we at the bottom? Are we the last line?
I think we're equal partners in that process, and I think we have to exert that. And as chairman of the Resources Committee, I'm going to exert that we're equal partners in that decision making.
Who could get hurt down the line? Is it going to be mining and ag?
I think the tough choices are going to involve mining. They're going to involve ag. They're going to also involve ratepayers. They're going to, unless some conservation being the key, the protection of the source, the Colorado River, is going to be the key to make sure that we have, for the foreseeable future, generations from now, that resource still available to you.
If we believe the seas are rising, if you believe that as a climate change advocate, wouldn't the solution be to pump water out of the ocean and desalinate it and use it? I mean, it's expensive.
It's very expensive.
But would that not be the ultimate answer?
The desalination plant that was built near Yuma, that is not functional anymore, to try to do exactly what you said, the price tag on it scared people away. It's $22 million just to get it started, and then with an adjacent cost every year. But I think we're going to get to the point where we should not ignore any possibility in terms of creating a water resource bank that we don't have right now.
We're going to take a break here on Newsmaker Saturday. Congressman Raúl Grijalva, 3rd District of Arizona, 8 terms in the U.S. House, going for a 9th, right?
Inevitably, yes.
Okay, if you were going to lay a bombshell on me and say, by the way, I'm not running, that we should have put that at the top, but you're running.
I'm running.
Okay, back in a minute with Congressman Raúl Grijalva. Back on Newsmaker Saturday with Congressman Raúl Grijalva, his 8th term in Congress, elected in 2002. We go way, way back when he was on the school board of Tucson Unified. Is 8 terms too long? Do you believe in you obviously don't believe in term limits. You would have term limited yourself. But do you think there's a point where we should start to say, you do a few terms?
Yeah, I think that all of us that are in electoral politics and this level of public service, we know when it's time to begin to gather yourself and move on to something else. I haven't reached that point. But the other thing is that, you have to understand that if my career in Congress, I have been in the minority like 90% of the time. So the opportunity to affect policy, the opportunity to put together legislation and pass it, has not been afforded to me. Now I have that opportunity, and it's a renewal of some sort, because prior to that, we just had to put up the best fight we could and keep the worst from happening.
Let's talk about one of those fights, and that would be over the Mueller report, tape number 6. We get the Mueller report. William Barr, the Attorney General, kind of dissects it and issues a statement in a 4-page letter about kind of the bottom line. No collusion, open question on obstruction of justice, almost in a sense leaving it, Mueller did, to the House to figure out where to go from here. Do you believe that there is impeachable stuff in that report that would warrant going forward with impeachment?
I believe that the roadmap is there, and I don't think we should take impeachment off the table. I don't think the House should. I know there's political considerations about, would this create a victimhood issue for Trump? Would it make him more popular? Sympathetic, as it did Clinton. But, there's something a little bit deeper at stake here, and that's a fundamental issue of our democracy. The Russian issue is true without a doubt as to what they try to do, and the fact that the Trump campaign took advantage of it. and the obstruction issue, the 10 points, I think all of them need to be followed.
If you start
At some point, as those evolve, articles of impeachment to me is not something that we should take lightly, but it's not something we should avoid either.
As Steny Hoyer said this week, we're 19 months from an election. He said, let it be decided then. Don't go down the road of impeachment. That's one of your guys. He's a Democrat in the House leadership. He's saying he doesn't think it's a good idea, and Nancy Pelosi is obviously.
I know. The leadership feels that it is, in a political calculation, that it doesn't help the Democrats both retain the House and win the presidency. I think that as we go forward, and these committees, judiciary, oversight, ethics, ways and means, foreign affairs, do their job, that we're going to see egregious things come out. We're going to follow all the roadmap that Mueller put out there, because it's not an exoneration, and Attorney General Barr's become a criminal defense attorney as opposed to being the Attorney General.
What if somebody says to you, Congressman, they stop you on an airplane, you're flying back and forth all the time, and they say, you know what, let us decide that in the election. You guys get back to doing your job.
Well, I think there's an inevitability that's going to happen anyways. That let's say the House does the articles of impeachment. Let's say we prevail, and those are sent forward to the Senate. I don't think McConnell is going to allow that to get any further than that. And as such, we're still going to be confronted with an election. The issue will be that we still have to, if that happens, then you still have to beat Trump at the polls. And everybody should be preparing for that, shouldn't ignore it. But at the same time, we should be transparent and assertive about making sure that all the information is available to the American public so they can make decisions. If it's an election or if it's a process of impeachment, it should all be out there.
Of this crowded field for the Democrats, I think we're up to, how many candidates are we at now? We're pushing 20.
20 plus, I think.
This reminds me of, 2.5 years ago when Trump was in that crowded field. Is there anyone in that mix that you particularly like?
Yeah, I think it's a very diverse mix, and it should be. That's our party. We're a mixture of all kinds of Americans in our party, a good mixture. I philosophically supported Bernie early. I think I was the first congressman to endorse him in the last time around. I still have great admiration and support for him. I think one of the people that has impressed me a lot is Elizabeth Warren, Senator Warren, because she is putting out solid position papers that I happen to agree with, out for the public, content-oriented. She might not be getting a lot of traction on those, but she's doing that, and I support that. That's my ideal.
Okay, let's talk about one of her proposals. She talked about Americans figuring out a way to pay off this ridiculous amount of student loan debt, which I would argue you guys created in Congress by making this money too easy, but it's $1.5 trillion in student loan debt.
Well, part of
what in the world? I mean, I think everybody
42% of students end up in some either behind or in default as we go through that. That's a huge number. That's a bigger number than the bubble that burst when the housing crisis happened.
No kidding. But you know what? The average kid trying to pay off as they're an adult paying off their student loan debt, it's only 5% of their income. So it's not an albatross that's insurmountable.
I think what Warren said about up to $50,000 forgiven,
right?
In terms of the waiver, I think that's a legitimate point to make. Making college and tuition more affordable, if not free in public universities and state
universities. How do we pay for this stuff, though? I mean, we're talking about.
I think that's an investment issue, and part of it is that you have at some point, whether it is now or in the future, in the near future, you have to re-examine those tax cuts that were made by the Republican majorities in the House and Trump. We are now seeing the fact that our deficit has gone up, our debt has gone up, and it's all related to the fact that we have shrunk revenue for this government, and at the same time given tax breaks where no revenue is coming in.
Now, I got into an argument about this last week. The tax cuts themselves generated more revenue, but we have, in Congress, spent more. In other words, the tax cuts created a record amount of revenue, but we're spending even more than that. So we can never get kind of back where we were.
This $1 trillion deficit that we're in right now was created in the spending and budgetary decisions that were made by the Republican majority and budget decisions that were signed into law by the President of the United States. And as such, at the same time, we keep threatening Medicare, we keep threatening Social Security, we keep threatening other social programs like public education as being the culprits. They're 4 to 5% of our national budget, 8% at the max in education, and yet they're being pointed out as the reason. See, I think the priorities are skewed, and as such, until we re-examine those tax cuts and repeal some of them if necessary, change the formula on others, this deficit issue is going to continue to rise.
Let me ask you about, you held for the first time, one of the things you had not been doing because you were in the minority party was dealing with climate change. You had your first climate hearings in 8 years in February.
Yep.
You're a believer.
Yep.
No question.
Well, you know, I believe in science and fact.
Do you believe it's settled science?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think to relitigate whether that is fact or not, to 95%, if not more, of Nobel Prize winners in these particular areas say that climate change is real, that it is caused by humans, it is caused by the emissions that we're creating, and those emissions are getting higher. Yes. I don't think you can get around the acidity and heating of our ocean and the rising. You can't get around the weather changes that are going on around us without putting responsibility, our own decision making, and moving in a different direction.
Does it ever make, just as a smart guy, does it ever make you pause when you look back on what these guys were predicting 29 years ago on the first Earth Day? They were talking about massive global cooling, ice age. Do you remember this stuff? You and I were around for this.
Yeah, but
so they can be, you know, they can get ahead of themselves with their models that are created by humans. The models are only as good as the data.
But you had the UN report that validated that. You had this administration's own report that validated the fact that it's occurring, that our climate is warming, and the consequences of that, and that our window of opportunity to begin to roll back, mitigate, or adapt to what's going on is shrinking every day.
Let me ask you about the Green New Deal. And Ocasio-Cortez, who I have not had the pleasure of meeting, but you know her, I'm sure, well, because you're in the Progressive Caucus with her, right? She kind of kicked this thing off. Give me your read on her. I'm very curious about her.
Very bright and natural at what we do. Very, very bright woman, young. And I think the Green New Deal is aspirational. It creates urgency. We have to do something about the issue of climate change.
She's a disruptor, right?
I think
she's challenging the old guard. She is challenging leadership. I mean,
as part of the old guard, I would suggest that Ms. Ocasio-Cortez is the future. And I think politics in this country are heading in that direction. And she's just the harbinger of that.
We've got about 45 seconds left. What have you learned in this time since 2002 in the U.S. Congress?
I think I've learned a degree of patience.
With Republicans?
With just the process. You know, our democracy is a democracy that demands much, and it should. So what I believe to be the perfect idea is not going to end up being the result. So you have to concede that there is compromise, there's meeting in the middle, there's trying to work out and trying to take a step forward on those things.
Do you think it still works?
I absolutely believe it can work, and it does. It should work. I absolutely believe the American people want us to do things. They're more solution-oriented than sitting around doing philosophical.
Does it beat TUSD School Board?
No, there was only 5 of us, and I had to convince 2. Now I have to convince 218.
Right, that is very true. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Come back on the program.
Anytime.
All right, thank you. Raúl Grijalva, Democratic Congressman from Arizona District 3. We're back in a minute on Newsmaker Saturday. Thanks again, Congressman. Appreciate it. I want to again thank my guest, Congressman Raúl Grijalva. You can reach me on both social media platforms, Facebook and Twitter at Johnn Hook Fox 10. We'll see you next week on Newsmaker Saturday.